Hello, everyone. This is Steven Yassel and Yissel Missile Productions channel. And today we're doing a little something different. I have here with me this book titled Coral Castle by Rusty McClure and Jack Heffron. And it is the mystery of Ed Leedskalnin, the Latvian pronunciation of his name. And we're going to go through the introduction and chapter one. And we might as well just get going. I'm going to have a slideshow. So let me get that. Let me put some background on this first before we jump in. So I picked this book up at Coral Castle in February of 2023. I visited this location, and it is a marvel of architecture. And I don't really see too many videos going in depth on this subject, so I figured why not I do something with this. So yeah, hope you're all doing well. All right. So I took pictures. I took pictures over here, so we're going to be going through a little bit of these as I read from this, but I want to read the back cover and then we are going to jump right into it. And I know this is an unusual time for me to be doing this, but yeah, I really figure this is something worth doing. Might as well start now. Just making sure that all of this is working. It's not really showing. I'm supposed to be having myself on the little on the corner. All right, I guess we're just gonna roll with it here. All right, so unexplained phenomenon. In Homestead, Florida, 30 miles south of Miami, stands one of America's most awe-inspiring and mysterious structures, Coral Castle. It was built in the 1920s and 30s by an eccentric Latvian immigrant named Edward Leedskalnin. Working alone with primitive tools, the strange little hermit quarried, carved, and set in place more than 1,100 tons of coral rock, creating what is known as the American Stonehenge. The mystery? No one knows how he did it. He worked at night, in private, and he took his secret to the grave. Some believe he was simply a talented stonemason and engineer. Others believe he harnessed anti-gravity powers, which allowed him to move the stones as if by magic. Still others link him to the occult, even to extraterrestrials. Leedskalnin made no secret of why he built it, to woo a young Latvian girl who had broken his heart. He called her his Sweet 16. Her identity, too, remains a mystery. Coral Castle is the first book to take an objective, in-depth look at this fascinating story. Authors Rusty McClure and Jack Heffron tell the tale as it could never be told before, bringing it to a mass audience for the first time. A powerful tale of love and genius. It's a story you'll never forget. So let's dive right in, shall we? says to Edward Leedskalnin, whose vision, intellect, and craftsmanship and courage met head on his severe isolation and loss, who left to the world a special monument imbued with imagination, possibility, and mystery. We dedicate this book. And there's one more quote here. He always called her Sweet 16 whenever he mentioned her name. Someday she would return to him when his labor of love gained fame. He would build a show place for her. Then she would realize her mistake. She'd leave her simple peasant life and this castle a home they'd make. And that's from Mary N. Yandel from her poem, The Mystery of Coral Castle. So you're seeing the man here. And yes, in the gift shop, there were some interesting things here. There's me. I'm 5'9". For a size comparison, that's a 1-to-1 scale of him. All right. So I was gonna skip the forward, but you know what? I'll read it anyway. So this is in the author's words here from this book. In August of 1992, Hurricane Andrew made landfall just south of Miami, Florida. Andrew was a devastating storm, the third most powerful of the 20th century, and ended up causing billions of dollars worth of property damage. Hundreds of thousands of people were left temporarily homeless, and dozens of lives were lost in Florida alone. Of significantly less importance, my family's planned Christmas vacation trip to the Caribbean was ruined. My wife, Amy, and I, and our daughters, aged 4 and 2, decided instead to visit Amy's parents in Miami, Florida. I made sure to pick up a number of pamphlets describing the area's tourist attractions. Most of those attractions fell into two basic categories: animal-themed parks, parrot jungle, monkey jungle, etc., and amusement parks, the granddaddy of which, Disney World, which was just a little too far north for us to make the drive with such young children. One of those brochures, however, stood out. It advertised a place called Coral Castle. The castle was constructed of huge blocks of coral rock, oolitic limestone, that had been quarried as single pieces from the ground. Inside the castle were other huge limestone structures, rocking chairs, a sundial, a telescope, an obelisk, quarried from the same material, some of them weighing as much as 57,000 pounds, heavier than the heaviest rocks at Stonehenge, according to the pamphlet. The castle, built over a half a century earlier, had recently been placed on the National Historic Registry. Odd stuff. Ripley's Believe It or Not stuff. What was even more incredible, the castle was the work of a single man. His picture was in the brochure too. His name was Edward Leedskalnin. I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna get that. He was a Latvian immigrant, a dour-looking fellow who'd come to America in the early 20th century and spent his life building his forbidding-looking structure. Not at all the kind of thing that I could even take a few hours to see myself at that point. Andrew had made landfall, and as it turned out, in the town of Homestead, where Coral Castle was located, and the entire area, though not the castle itself, was a disaster. But something about the place, about the little man who'd built it, struck a chord with me. From time to time, over the ensuing years, I would come across mention of the castle. A newspaper article, a radio show, a brief mention in a travel magazine. A lot of people, it turned out, found the story as fascinating as I did. There was, I came to realize, some controversy attached to the story as well, particularly with regard to Ed's construction methods. You'll read more about that controversy in the pages to follow, but in brief, a lot of people found it impossible to believe that Ed could have accomplished his incredible engineering feats with just the simple tools, the handmade blocks, tackles, pulleys, and winches readily at his disposal. These people believed that something more was involved, something almost supernatural. Ancient construction secrets, long lost, alien technologies, uncovered, scientific principles, somehow deduced. These were the things that made Ed's incredible achievements possible. A lot of it, frankly, sounded to me like nonsense. I wasn't a big believer in UFO conspiracies or that kind of thing, then or now, but am a student of history. It was clear to me that huge technological leaps, when they came along, often turned the miraculous into the mundane. I had also worked heavy industrial construction for 2 summers while I was in college. We poured a lot of concrete in those days, a lot of very, very heavy concrete. And every time I tried to picture Ed working with all that weight on his own, working with the precision and skill he did, something about that picture didn't ring true to me. I began to wonder, what if Ed really had, as he sometimes claimed, discovered the secrets of the pyramid builders? What if there really was something extraordinary in what he had done? That story, true or not, appealed to me probably because it sounded so much like the stories I had been reading since I was a kid, like Ian Fleming's James Bond novels, every last one of which I had read by the time I finished my junior year of high school. In fact, Ed himself seemed like a character taken from one of those novels to me. The reclusive scientist whose technological breakthrough made possible something. What? I wasn't exactly sure of, but in my mind, the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was one hell of a story, or at least the beginnings of one. But in my mind was where that story stayed. In the 1990s, when the internet era came along, websites devoted to Coral Castle and its creator began to spring up like dandelions. Each new one offered claims more incredible than the last about what had really happened in Homestead. Meanwhile, I was hearing some real life stories of the incredible from business and military contacts I had made in the course of my work. Stories about defense projects, in particular, that seemed the stuff of science fiction themselves. I also began to work on a biography of my grandfather and great uncle, Lewis and Powell Crosley, who had run a series of businesses bearing their name, most famously the Crosley Broadcasting Company, from the 1920s through the 1950s. They had been involved in top secret defense projects of their own, projects related to their experience in radio broadcasting technology, their expertise in miniaturization of electronic components involving that technology. At some point, all these ingredients, Crosley Enterprises, the military, Coral Castle, and Edward Leedskalnin came together in my mind. The beginnings of a story, a plot that would eventually emerge as a novel. Cincinnatus began to take shape. In the course of writing that novel, I finally, 15 years after Hurricane Andrew touched down, had the chance to visit Coral Castle in person. I was frankly prepared to be disappointed. In my mind, I had built the castle up to such a degree that the real thing I worried would be a letdown, a tacky tourist trap, cheesy somehow. As it turned out, I wasn't disillusioned in the least. Coral Castle was everything that I had dreamed of it being and more. More than the scattered pieces of information I'd been able to glean from the internet and the articles, pamphlets devoted to it. By the time I finished Cincinnatus, I knew there was another book I wanted to write, one that, for the first time, would collect all the facts and a great deal of the speculation regarding Coral Castle and its creator in one place. You now hold that book in your hands. Believe what you wish as you read the following pages, but when you finish, go see Edward Leedskalnin's creation in person for yourself. I believe Coral Castle will not disappoint you either. Rusty McClure, October 2009. So that was the foreword, and now we're moving on to the introduction. 25 miles south of Miami, on the way to the Florida Keys, sits a most unusual roadside attraction. Amidst a busy commercial district of strip malls, gas stations, and chain restaurants, in the shadow of the traffic zooming along US 1, stands a structure more of a piece with Europe's ancient megalithic monuments than the roadside quiche of southern Florida. A veritable fortress of sculpted stone that occupies a uniquely gray area on the American cultural landscape. Even in the middle of the day, stripped bare beneath the heat of the Florida sun, the place possesses an eeriness that creeps across every jagged surface of the pocketed coral stone from which it draws its name. It seems to belong to another world, an ancient, long-lost world, the world of Stonehenge and the ziggurats, the world of Babylon and the mound builders. It excludes, it exudes a primitive simplicity, a stunning natural beauty, a mix of plants and stones, a juxtaposition of organic textures that makes the landscape outside its walls look dull, crass, and phony. This is Coral Castle. On websites and blogs that champion the existence of UFOs, the lost city of Atlantis, and the magnetic grid theory, it is as significant in human history as the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the Moai heads of Easter Island. Its creator was significant as well. He was a European immigrant who came to Florida in 1923, a dying man, diagnosed with a terminal illness, given no more than 6 months to live. A man who not only managed miraculously to survive, but to thrive, to not just live, but over the next 30 years, achieved one of the most amazing construction feats in all of human history. A man possessed of a dream and a vision, an odd little hermit who lived in the woods beyond what was then a remote, sparsely populated town. Driven by that vision, this man pulled gigantic stones from the ground, some weighing as much as 30 tons and some as tall as 40 feet. Rocks that dwarfed those that had been quarried millennia earlier at Stonehenge. He stood these unimaginably massive stones on end, placing them next to each other so accurately that he needed no mortar or cement in the seams between. With consummate skill, he carved the pieces into chairs and tables, into crescent moons and planets. He worked on his masterpiece for nearly 30 years. Even more amazing, he did this work all by himself, refusing any and all offers of assistance. He used only primitive tools that he fashioned out of old car parts he foraged from the nearby junkyard. And he worked only at night, using the moon and a lantern to light his labors. When nosy neighbors snuck up to find out what he was doing, he somehow sensed their presence and immediately stopped working. Sometimes he called out and let them know that he saw them. Other times he simply slipped away into his living quarters and waited for them to leave. This man's name was Edward Leedskalnin. By the time his castle was complete, Leedskalnin, who stood all of 5 feet tall, who weighed no more than 125 pounds, had quarried 1,110 tons of huge, brittle blocks of oolitic limestone, commonly known as coral rock. He had moved them, carved them, and set them in place with a precision rivaling that of the Great Pyramids of Egypt, whose blocks, weighing only half as much as those he had quarried, were moved by entire nations of the enslaved. How did he do it? Back in the day, when people asked, Ed usually would give a sly smile and say that he, quote, knew the secrets of the Great Pyramids, end quote. To some, that meant simply he had measured the art of leverage, that he combined this knowledge with the stone cutting skills learned at his grandfather's knee to create his masterpiece. They would see a large tripod and a number of pulleys on the property and take him at his word. Others were not so convinced, then or now. Many believed Ed had mastered and somehow found a way to break the laws of gravity, or that he applied his own understanding of electromagnetic forces, as detailed in the books he would later publish, to create a perpetual motion generator. Some thought he was able to levitate the rocks he pulled from the ground. Others thought he possessed secrets born of alien technology. They find evidence for these beliefs in the mind-boggling shapes, symbols, and formations he placed throughout Coral Castle, which they see as echoing those of ancient Egypt or the Freemasons, Latvian folklore, or extraterrestrial intelligence. Standing in the middle of the castle, though, surveying the remarkable achievements all around, the 8-foot stone walls, the 20-foot table in the shape of Florida, the rocking chairs that weigh literally a ton and still somehow manage to rock, the presence of one senses most of all is a human one. The Coral Castle speaks first and foremost of the man who built it, of the long, lonely hours Leedskalnin spent yanking gigantic rock from the ground beneath him, of moving and carving and shaping that rock. At dusk on summer's eve, as the traffic slows, one can almost hear the rasp of his chisel breaking the silence of the dark, humid Florida night. The work required to build such a place is overwhelming to consider. The story of Coral Castle is indeed a story of magnificent, almost superhuman achievement. It is also the story of an all too human obsession. The story of a man and a woman and a broken heart. So that was the forward and introduction of this book. And I think what I will do is read this chapter by chapter. But I did say that I will read chapter one. I'm just a little parched here. So just let me get a drink of water and we'll dive right in. But yeah, the picture you're seeing here is one that I took when I visited. All right. So we are going to read chapter one, and I'll try to browse through the pictures while I do that. Chapter one, Life in Latvia. There's been a lot of written, there's been a lot written about Edward Leedskalnin in the half century since his death. Magazine articles, newspaper stories, and more recently, internet sites by the dozens have pages devoted to the man and his creation. Unfortunately, a lot of the information is speculative, undocumented, and sometimes simply wrong. Many errors and unsubstantiated stories have been picked up and passed on, eventually calcifying into facts, quote, that lack clear sources or any real basis of attribution. Within some fields of study, Ed is legendary, but the legends about him grow more from anecdote and hearsay than from actual research and knowledge. This is hardly surprising. Ed was, after all, a shy man, a quiet man, a loner who moved around quite a bit, a man who never married, who had no close friends or family in the United States with whom he kept in touch, a man who was not a member of any organizations and owned no property outside of Florida. He was never part of an immigrant community, and he didn't leave much behind after his death. Though he published several booklets about his ideas, from his views on love and politics to electricity and magnetic current, he rarely wrote or talked about himself. The facts we do have are very slim, particularly when it comes to his early years, and some of those are in dispute. Records of even the simplest things often conflict, such as his birthday, January 12th, 1887, according to the registration card Ed himself filled out in 1917, August 10th, 1887, according to his death certificate, and his birthplace, a town called Ian Gubelin in the Latvian district of Gulbane, according to documents Ed filled out before crossing the Atlantic. Stamayo, according to documents he filed for a border crossing from Canada to the United States in 1913. Stamania Progasta, according to the documents in the Coral Castle Museum. And Stamarina, according to other experts. There is agreement on some of the facts. Ed was the fifth son of Mini and Andres Leedskalnin, a word meaning from the mountains. The Leedskalnin, the Latvian words usually place the accent on the first syllable, and the NS ending is pronounced with what sounds like an added H, making the correct Latvian pronunciation of the name Leedskalnin. They were farmers living and working in rural eastern Latvia on rented land. Ed's early years were spent in a lovely pastoral landscape, wide open fields of rye, oats, wheat, and barley, a hilly countryside where he was expected to nature in all her glory, or he was exposed to nature in all her glory. But he and his brothers were working for much of that time, working with little hope of a better life for themselves. The boys, like their parents and grandparents, were peasants, trapped by poverty within a rigid class system, a feudal system where the lower classes did not mingle with the upper, where the peasants kept to the fields and the lords to their castles. As the youngest of five boys, Ed no doubt learned from his brothers, emulating them as they worked the fields and tended the livestock. Though the work was physically difficult, the peasant farmers enjoyed a sense of community. Families remained together, and neighbors knew each other well, and sometimes knew each other their entire lives. The Leedskalnins were most likely Lutheran, though it's not known how much they followed the tenets of the church. What they and their neighbors were all attentive to, what they all celebrated, was the cycle of the seasons, especially the summer solstice. The celebration of the solstice was combined with the feast of John the Baptist to form the national holiday of midsummer on June 24th. In Latvia, the day is called Yani or Johnny or Janus or Janus, on which traditional songs are sung and revelers gorge on cheese and beer. Men wear oak wreaths and women wear wreaths of flowers. Ed retained his sensitivity to and appreciation of the cycles of nature throughout his life, which he made clear in some of his sculptures at Coral Castle. Ed did attend school, according to most, up to the fourth grade. It would be wrong, though, to assume that because he received so little formal schooling that he was uneducated. Ed absorbed knowledge not just from books, but from those around him, his peers, his elders, and his family. By the time he was in his 20s, he could read, write, and probably speak at least three languages. There was something else he'd become expert at as well by that point. Something he learned from his father, uncles, and brothers, a skill that was passed down from generation to generation of Leedskalnins, the art of cutting stone. By the time Ed was an adult, he had years of experience as a stonemason, working on everything from tombstones to the huge castles belonging to his lords and masters. It was a skill that was to serve him well later in life. I need another drink of water here. All right. In the late 19th century, Latvia, as it had been since 1721, was part of the Russian Empire. Political and military power was held by Moscow. Latvians outside of those in the capital city of Riga were generally poor farmers and artisans, living as virtual serfs in what remained of a feudal society. Change, though, was in the air. A general unrest among the lower classes throughout Europe and the development of socialism sparked a growing nationalistic movement in Latvia. People began to object to the oppressive conditions within the country. They wanted not just a change in the social order, they wanted to run things themselves. Latvians, like most other peoples under the sway of Imperial Russia, objected to the oppressive autocratic rule of Tsar Nicholas II and the conditions he imposed on them. By the time Ed was in his late teens, young men of his age burned with the dream of a better life and a country of their own. They swelled the ranks of the Latvian Social Democratic Workers' Party, so much so that by the turn of the century, that party, despite the huge disparity in the size of countries, outnumbered its Russian counterpart. Prominent among these young Latvian men was one of Ed's brothers, Otto, who often spoke at political meetings. On January 9th, 1905, in the streets of St. Petersburg in Russia, a group of demonstrators gathered to deliver a petition to the Tsar, a petition that pleaded for the government to show greater leniency in dealing with its workers. Unrest exploded into bloodshed as soldiers fired into the crowd. Hundreds of people were killed and wounded. A few days later, on January 13th, 10,000 strikers gathered in sympathetic support on the banks of the Daugava River in Riga. Soldiers fired on them, killing 73 and wounding many more. When the gunfire erupted, many people ran into the ice-covered river and drowned when the ice gave way. The slaughter sparked a full-scale uprising in Latvia, just as sympathetic strikes and demonstrations throughout the Russian Empire ignited other uprisings. In the eastern regions of Latvia, peasant farmers burned the estates of the German lords, and months of violence ensued. Attempts by the military to break the uprising failed. Martial law was declared in August. The Tsar demanded retribution, arresting thousands, exiling many to Siberia. Ed's brother Ernest was arrested and sent to prison in St. Petersburg. Ed Leedskalnin, Otto's son, believed his uncle Ed was involved in the revolt as well. Quote, "My father told me that when the Black Hundred, the Russian Cossacks working for the Tsar, came, Ed left for the Lubana forests to join the partisans. Otto said that Ed always worked about with a rifle hidden underneath his coat. Once he met with a Cossack patrol and just calmly walked on. If he had run, they would have shot him for sure, without asking if he was partisan or not." Regardless of whether or not Ed was actively involved in the revolt, there is no firm proof of his participation, His life was deeply affected by it. He was an impressionable 18-year-old who had just witnessed the destruction of his country's budding nationalist movement. He had seen the terrible retribution on the demonstrators by both the Russian government and the German aristocracy. People knew, people he knew were killed or were exiled to frozen wastelands from which it seemed they might never return. He saw family and neighbors flee, abandoning the land that had been their home for generations. Some fled the country altogether, going to London and other cities in England. Approximately 5,000 emigrated to the United States, doubling the Latvian population in America. By 1912, Ed had decided to emigrate as well. There are some who say that he left because of fear of retribution by the Tsar's police. Ed's brother Otto told his son Evald that, quote, Ed was pursued by the Tsar's police and could not stay in Latvia any longer, end quote. Others, Latvian writer and editor Andris Stromanis, prominent among them, doubt that Ed left for those reasons. By 1912, Stromanis believes fear of reprisals from the 1905 uprising were long since past. In the years to come, when Ed would talk about why he'd ultimately leave to Latvia, he would refer only obliquely to his troubles with the Russians. More often than not, he would talk about something else, or rather, someone else. Her name was Agnes Scuffs. She was the girl he had been planning to marry. The two met, according to one of those legends that have grown up around Ed, at some point contemporaneous with the turn of the century's political uprisings. Agnes was 10 years Ed's junior. He met and fell in love with her when she was still in her teens, proposing to her shortly thereafter. She accepted. A wedding date was set and a place was chosen, a small church in the town of Vekjolbeen. And then, for reasons unknown, Agnes changed her mind. Ed's grandnephew, Janis Leedskalnin, told Andros Starvis, author of Karalu Pills, exactly what happened at the ceremony, as it had been relayed to him by his grandfather Jacobs and grandmother Lizette, who were among the invited guests. Agnes and Ed were standing together at the altar. The priest approached and asked each of them in turn if they were ready to commit to the other. Agnes could not find it in her heart to say, I do. She turned away and left Ed standing at the altar, alone. After a moment, he hurried after her and subsequently vanished. According to Janice, he was never seen again in Latvia. A tangled web of speculation has grown up around the reasons for Agnes's actions. Some say that her mother forbade the wedding because Ed was too old, or that he was too poor. A mere peasant would not do for her daughter. Others say that Agnes was in love with another man, perhaps a friend of her father's who lived in England. Still others say that the girl Ed would long for the rest of his life was not Agnes Scuffs at all, but instead a young woman named Hermane Lucis. The disappointment, the embarrassment were, according to Janice, the primary reasons Ed decided to emigrate. Quote, It is absolutely clear that Ed left for America because he was jilted by his bride, Janice declared. Thomas Lorman, professor professor of Eastern European Studies at the University of Cincinnati, agrees. Quote, Ed becomes a laughingstock. A 20-something to be turned down by a 16-year-old, it's a pretty appalling slap. It's a slap of class distinctions. End quote. That slap may have been the final push in a direction that Ed was already contemplating. The political situation in Latvia remained messy, and the drums of war had already begun to beat on the horizon. The wedding was gone, the wedding gone wrong, then may have confirmed for him the notion that it was time to try his luck elsewhere. He may have been thinking he would leave for only a year or two before returning to his homeland, as many immigrants did at the time. If so, he was mistaken. On March 23rd, 1912, Edward Leedskalnin, like so many others of his generation, departed Europe for America, the land of opportunity. He was never to return. And there's a full page here of the port of Riga, Latvia's capital city and the largest city. So pretty interesting. All right, we're almost done with the chapter. So I will wrap it up. Wrong screen. All right, here we go. Okay. Oh no, we're done. We're done. All right, so that was chapter one. And yeah, I'm able to see you guys here in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Project UMPRA. Hey, Jason, it's good to see you. I could just sit here and read this whole thing today, but it could be several hours. I want to chop this down into sections. So, next time we'll go through, uh, I can try to do chapters 2 and 3. I think that'll work out. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll get better at reciting and reading from the book as we go. There are some words in there that like I couldn't pronounce well at first, but that's how things are. And yeah, these are pictures that I took when I was at Coral Castle. So I guess I'll wrap this up with a little rundown of some of these photos. Some of these were wells for water and like basins for bathing and stuff. I believe this one is the well, although I could be wrong. Yeah, I think doing chapters 2 and 3 for the next video would be good. And I'll live stream all of this. I enjoy doing it this way. So this is the heart-shaped dinner table that's inside Coral Castle. And I do have a, what do you call it? Panoramic of this entire place. It's really incredible. But yeah, so that's all for today. And thanks for being here. I know we get we get viewers towards the end of the streams here, but this will be an ongoing series. We're going to get through the entire book, Coral Castle, by Rusty McClure and Jack Heffron. And we finished the foreword, the introduction in chapter 1 today. And next time we will be doing chapters 2 and 3. And I know you all enjoy it. I'm reading through this with you guys, so you're experiencing it the first time as I am. You can see I just took it out of the package after having it for nearly 2 years because I wanted to wait till the time was right to do it. And I felt today was the day to start. But if you guys want to pick the book up for yourselves, here's the name and the authors. This one's an autographed copy. It's kind of cool. Got Randy's signature there. Good to see you in the chat here, Brenda and Jason and Project UMPRA. Good to see you all here. So, yeah, I guess this will be about an hour for each segment here. There's only 8 chapters in the book, but it's going to be getting into a lot of stuff that I haven't really talked about on the channel. But this is very interesting to me, the architecture and everything. And yeah, it's one of our modern marvels. And it's not going to stay around forever. The type of stone that it's made out of, it will not last that in like the next 150 years or so. It's all going to weather down. And some of it you could see it's starting to pit. It most likely wasn't like that when he first built it, but you start to see all of the, because this is coral bed. This is not really this is not your typical stone. And it being outside in the weather and everything, it's just over time gonna be decayed. And I don't really think they're gonna build a structure over it like a roofing. I think putting a roof on this location would be just wrong. But how else are you supposed to save it? You know? But yeah, that's it for today. I'm gonna end it now for real this time. I'll see you all in the next one. And until then, class dismissed.